What's up, everybody? Welcome to Breaking Biotech, everyone's favorite biotech podcast. My name is Matt, and thank you so much for watching or listening today. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, or leave me a comment, and I would greatly appreciate it. And for those who haven't noticed, I've been gone for quite a while, and I've been actually visiting Toronto, my home and native land, where it is super cold up there and super snowy. So I'm extremely glad to be back in San Diego, where it's beautiful and sunny, and I can talk about biotech and everything that I've missed in the last little while. And there's been a lot. So at ASH, there's definitely been a lot of updates from the companies that I'm invested in and some that I've made calls on. So we'll talk about that. We'll finish up with a portfolio wrap up and leave you to it. So I'm going to be touching on a lot of different companies today rather than a deep dive on any single topic, but I think that's going to be most interesting for people out there. So let's get into it. So I have the XBI up right now, and we closed just under 79. And when I look at it, I see some support, pretty strong support at 74.5. And then I drew this little trend line here showing a support development as we sort of build off of that 74. So we'll see what goes on in the future, but there's definitely a lot of macro events that are keeping the riskier companies, preventing the riskier companies from being invested in. So biotech, high risk investment. So until we can get a little bit more clarity on whether or not the economy is actually going to go into a recession or not, we'll probably see a lot of volatility in the sector. So I haven't sold any of my equity going into this downturn, but I do continue to trade some options in the XBI when we see a relatively high pump up to at least like 85 or so. So they're just small plays, and so far I've been pretty lucky, but I keep that investment kind of small because I know that trading options can be pretty risky. So we'll see what goes on, but the XBI, I kind of have it up just because we've been in this downturn, and then we've been going from around like 74 to about 80 something. But one stock in the XBI that's actually remained kind of stable is Fate Therapeutics. So they're a company that I put a decent amount of my portfolio into a few months back, and it's actually increased a lot in value. And I think that's based off of the news. Obviously, they recently filed an IND and got success in that IND for FT500, which is their NK product. And so the one thing about Fate that's pretty interesting is they're trying to create this off-the-shelf CAR T product, which is different than the other approved FDA products with CAR T, where you need to actually take the cells out of the patient, so it's an autologous transplantation. What Fate's trying to do is they're trying to make a product that they can just thaw or culture and then put into a patient. They don't need to wait that time from actually taking the stem cells out or taking the T cells out, modifying them, and then putting them back. Fate wants to actually have these cells ready to go, and they do that by creating these iPSCs, and at that state they can modify them and remove all of the HLA markers that could cause some sort of graft versus host reaction, and then they do the differentiation, and then they're ready to go. So I think that the market is looking at, after ASH, and we'll talk a little bit about some concerns about different gene therapies or stem cell-like gene therapies, and why they might be a concern. So I think the market kind of sees some interesting things in Fate in particular. And the other news that came out about them was their acquisition, or at least their IP control over these humanized BCMA CAR constructs. So this will be really interesting for their future when they try to create some sort of off-the-shelf product for different B-cell related cancers. So this is their pipeline, and I think things to look forward to. I haven't sold any of the Fate stock that I have, and I think that's and I'm not selling it because I think they're going to file more INDs, and if they see positive response from the FDA, they could be a buyout contender. So I think the combination of that mixed with the IND filings that they're going to do is going to continue to keep them at a high level. So I like Fate for that reason, and they've also not sold off very much in this downturn that we've seen in the XBI. So around September when it was going down, Fate actually increased quite a bit and they've remained around 16, 17 in that area. So I think that's good news for them. Okay, so let's get into a bit of the ASH stuff. So Spark had a small presentation at ASH, and it was an update on their SPK 8011. So that's the hemophilia product where they're trying to introduce the factor 8 into these patients using a lentiviral vector. And they saw that the first 12 patients had reduction in bleeds and infusion, which is good. And they saw that after 78 months of the transfection, they got stable. They still have stable factor 8 activity. So that's good. Not a huge change from what we expected. In terms of catalysts, they're going to start at phase 3 at the end of the year, and we're going to see another update in mid-2019. So they continue to stay around the 40 range after their the last decrease in their stock price, and it'll probably stay around then as long as the SPI stays relatively stable. But so this wasn't a huge update at ASH, but one of the one companies that really suffered at ASH was Bluebird, and so they have a bunch of different products trying to help out with beta thalassemia, with sickle cell disease. They also have some cancer products that actually, the cancer ones looked really good during ASH, but the beta thalassemia trial, they had an issue, and I forget which one HGB 204 was for, but both of them were lentiglobin products. And the real issue, and they showed some good data that showed effectiveness in the treatments, but 1 out of 9 patients in the HGB 206 trial showed positivity for a grade 4 myelodysplastic syndrome with excess blasts. And this is a blood cancer that could lead to acute myelogenous leukemia. So it's obviously very concerning for anybody who's going to do some sort of stem cell or gene therapy thing. So there's concern that the vector may have integrated into these cells that were taken out, and then they became cancerous through some method that's kind of unknown. So Bluebird did do a lot to see whether or not it was their therapy, and so they looked at after the diagnosis, they looked at bone marrow and looked at the CD34 positive cells, which would have been transfected originally, and they looked at CD34 negative cells, and they found very low amount of copy number in the CD34 positive cells, which suggests that it's not due to those. They didn't see any integration in the dysplasic cells, which is good. No clonal dominance in the transfected cells, suggesting that that not one clone had any sort of oncogenic potential that would have dominated and become cancerous in this patient. So the one thing that they did comment on is this busulfan, which has been used in different autologous stem cell transplants, and it has been associated with MDS. So there's a concern that it could be that. Tough to really know. I think the panel, the safety panel looks at it, said that it's likely not due to the lentiglobin itself, but obviously for 1 out of 9 patients for this to happen, it's really concerning. There were other grade 3 or above adverse events, which isn't very encouraging for patients who might want this therapy. So that's something else that Bluebird might have to deal with and change what they're thinking about when it comes to this. So the other thing that came out regarding their therapy was that 1 out of 18 patients had documented HIV 23 months after treatment. Kind of a weird, rare occurrence. They again say that it's unlikely related to the lentiglobin, but it looks terrible. So it's just something that's going to hammer the gene therapy companies and hammer any stem cell transplant type company that's doing this. So Bluebird got hammered for this. They were below 100 for a while, and I think they closed around 104 today. So I haven't sold any. My position in Bluebird is relatively small, and if we look at the comparison between the different CAR T competitors, or I say CAR T, but really they're different gene therapy types of gene therapy companies. And so Bluebird still has a market cap of around 5 billion, and they're not really making any money. Comparing them, I guess the other biggest one would be BioMarin, which makes a pretty decent amount of money right now. So Bluebird could fall quite a bit more from 105. There's nothing saying that they should stay at around 5 billion. Their products in cancer were very good, and I thought the data was really good on that. So I think they're being held up by that. And I think that as they continue, if they show in their future trials that nobody gets HIV and that this MDS was a one-off thing, I think the sell-off will be looked at as an overreaction, and it'll help there. But one I forget where I took this, but some firm kind of put it together in words where how the market kind of reacted to Bluebird, and when we talk about global blood, it'll make more sense. So when it comes to like sickle cell disease, gene therapy has some risks, and these include maybe high grade MDS. There's loss of fertility, unquantifiable risk of HIV, which the MDS and the HIV could just be one-off things. So these might be unwarranted. And then, of course, there's 5% risk of mortality. So for those reasons, Bluebird has taken the brunt of losses in the last little while in the market. But I do think that long-term gene therapy will prevail. We're going to see it's going to take a lot of work, and Bluebird has done a lot to shift their protocol, at least in certain trials. So they shifted their source of cells from the bone marrow to blood. So that might change things. We'll see, but I think they have a lot of cash, and they've dedicated a lot of time and effort into this, and I think they're going to continue until they can see that it's safe for patients and effective. But until then, any company that has a treatment for the therapies that Bluebird's looking into, and the beta thalassemia or sickle cell disease, they're obviously going to see a large market share, and it's going to take a long time for Bluebird to actually reach the market. So with that, I saw this chart. This is a published paper. I didn't put the actual reference here, but you could find it. There's a lot of potential treatments out there that are competing with the lentiviral treatments that are potentially curative. And one of those is voxelotor. And I've talked about global blood, and I said that I thought it was ridiculous that they would get accelerated approval given that they didn't show any improvements in vaso-occlusive crises. And of course I was wrong. So global blood, they got, I think in the same day, they announced that they got accelerated approval from the FDA, and they're going to meet with them in early Q1 of 2019 to figure out their plan for that. So that's great news for them. And this could all be related to the negative data around Bluebird. So the FDA probably sees that global blood is the best option right now compared to gene therapy. So they went ahead and gave them accelerated approval. But the data actually looks good, and I would say that given what we see here, that this would have changed my opinion. Seeing that they had reduced vaso-occlusive crises was really the thing that I thought global blood should demonstrate before they get accelerated approval. But hindsight, what are you going to do? So they showed some positive phase 3 data. 65% of patients on the high dose and 33% showed a greater than 1 gram per deciliter increase in hemoglobin at 24 weeks, which is very good. These patients were also, some of them were taking hydroxyurea, which is great. So it shows that it's probably through a different mechanism than hydroxyurea, which makes sense. And they showed the decrease in VOCs. So I think they have a lot of potential. I definitely think that they're oversold right now. They did do an offering a few days ago, which some people are kind of curious about, and I kind of agree. But given the increase in their stock price, a lot of companies, as soon as they see some sort of increase due to some news, they'll do an offering. And so I think definitely. You've seen some price targets from like 70 to around 100. I think it depends on what the cost that they're going to make their drug, voxelotor. And this is the patient demo, so 100,000 in the U.S. and 60,000 in the EU. I definitely see a lot of upside for them, and but I wouldn't put over 100 price target, because it's definitely relatively limited. They do have an antibody. I don't have the name of it, but if the antibody looks interesting, it should prevent adhesion, which would reduce vaso-occlusive crises. And if they do see positive data with that, that would obviously change things. But I did open a position after this news came out, and I'm going to hold them for a while. So great news for Global Blood. I made a wrong call, but that's how it goes, right? Definitely everybody who watches this should do their own due diligence, and only take what I'm giving you here as information only and not advice. So another thing that happened was Moderna, which is an interesting company, had a record IPO, and then it crashed about 20% on the first day. Their treatments are relatively comparable to Ionis. They're trying to put mRNA into cells and force your own native cells to produce the product of that mRNA. Kind of interesting, relatively basic concept. There's nothing like wild here, except that it works. And the real issues that they need to figure out are how to get the mRNA into the cell without the immune system degrading it, and or without any sort of RNases degrading it. But there are interesting ways of doing it. And so they dropped a lot on the first day, but it's not super surprising given that the entire biotech sector is in turmoil right now. So I don't think it really means anything for their future. They have a ton of clinical programs, and given that it's mRNA, you can buy an oligo from a lot of companies right now, and it's very cheap. And obviously they have a more sophisticated way of producing it, and a way of trying to get it into the target tissues properly. But oligos are very cheap, so it would be easy for them to create a new molecule for a different compound. So they have partnerships with AstraZeneca, who owns a large portion of the company, I believe. But so I thought that was interesting that they had this giant IPO, and then it kind of failed. But it looks like, if I pull it up, we're seeing some support around 18, but with only about a week in trading, probably less than that. It's hard to predict, but definitely an interesting company that I'm going to keep my eye on. The last thing I want to talk about regarding ASH was the bispecifics. So if anybody's noticed, I haven't talked very much about cancer, and that's because it's probably the sector, the area that I'm the least comfortable with. So I'm putting that out there right now, but I think I'm going to make a resolution in 2019 to be more do some more research in the cancer area, because I know there's a lot of companies that are completely focused on cancer, and immuno-oncology has been a huge boom, and CAR-T actually does a lot regarding cancer, obviously. But I've been doing some reading, and at least in what we saw in ASH are these bispecifics that have come out, which it's a very simple concept also, but it's effective. And basically it's an antibody it's two antibodies that are tied together somehow, and the companies do it differently. So Amgen does their BITE system, this bispecific T cell something, where they're modified antibodies, so they actually have a relatively short half-life in the blood, which is a challenge in and of itself, but also it requires patients to be infused more. So I don't know from a treatment perspective if that's better or not, but I think it depends on the disease itself. Roche and Regeneron also have a different kind of bispecific, and they're unique in their own way. So I think that this is a Roche product, but they do a 2-to-1 format. So there's two T cell receptors, so they bring more T cells per cancer cell that they're trying to attach to. So the concept is that sometimes cancer cells can avoid the immune system by downregulating certain receptors that they have. And the concept behind immuno-oncology in general is to facilitate bringing the host immune system to attack and destroy the tumor cells somehow. And whether that's using some sort of PD-L1 or PD-1 antibody, or using one of these bispecifics, you can force these tumor cells to be noticed by T cells. And these bispecifics use CD3 antibody, or I guess CD3 is most of it. I think this TCB might be a modified CD3, but that's obviously binds to T cells, and these receptors, CD20, CD33, or BCMA, is supposed to bind to the tumor cell and force these cells to interact, and then there can be proper destruction of them, and it actually seems to work very well. So the Amgen 420 product saw an 83% objective response rate in multiple myeloma, which is really nice. Their 330 product was pretty disappointing, so most patients discontinued because of disease progression in AML. So I think they're going to actually continue with this, which is surprising, just given that most patients discontinued. So I don't know. I'm surprised that they would continue, but maybe just they can afford it, I guess. But they're the first company to have a bispecific approved for second line ALL, acute. I'll have to remember that one, but they're bringing in a decent amount of revenue per quarter for this compound, so it's obviously there's a lot of potential in these things, and they actually might become a real competitor to CAR T, given that the revenues that are being generated for CAR T are a little disappointing, I think, and I think a lot of patients, or it's just a such more involved process, and it takes more resources for the companies to administer this, because they need to get the cells out, they need to modify the cells in a decent amount of time, and then put the cells back in. So I think that antibodies, they're obviously a lower burden for the company itself, and if they can show comparable or better effects in patients for these diseases, they might be preferable to the CAR T therapies. So that's why when I go back to thinking about Fate, they're producing an off-the-shelf product that could actually be very competitive to these antibodies if it's effective. So other compounds here. So there's two Roche compounds, this mosunetuzumab, which showed a nice response, and a Regeneron product that showed a nice response in another phase 1 study. So these are also relatively early studies, so it'll take some time for them to show good data in a larger patient population. So that's what I have for ASH. If do a quick portfolio wrap up, it's been rough out there. The NASH companies continue to be hammered for reasons that I don't have. I keep adding Viking, but I'm running out of money, so I've stopped adding, but they're down quite a bit here. Aimmune is down on relatively no news. They released an article on their therapy a while ago now, I think, but so I'm not too sure. Spirion continues to hang out around the 50 to 53 area, which is good. Illumina continues to go up, and they're probably one of the safer ones, so definitely these companies that have giant monopolies are the safest ones right now, I would say. Fate, like I've talked about, is up quite a bit. Then the gene therapy companies, Spark, Bluebird, where else? Oh yeah, Sangamo, Sarepta. Sarepta's not down too much, but definitely the Spark, Bluebird, Sangamo, they're down quite a bit, but I'm holding on to them. What else here? Yeah, so I haven't touched on Amarin. Not really much news for Amarin coming out, but they're probably just going to follow the XBI until there's some sort of dramatic catalyst that comes up. And then here's my global blood position. And yeah, so I made some money on XBI options, which is probably the only reason why I'm doing a little bit better than the S&P 500. But volatility continues to increase. So, we should expect a lot of wild swings in both the entire sector as well as the XBI. So we'll see. But with that, I'm going to wrap it up. So thank you guys all for watching very much. I'm going to go back to doing a weekly video once things get a little bit less hectic for me. But with that, thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.